We will be reading from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The dates of the events and conversations are March 11 and March 29, 1883. This is our online class number 53 on this holy book. Let us read from the book. I will start reading a portion, a part of which we read last time. Rakhal's father was sitting in the room in Dakshineshwar in which Sri Ramakrishna lived. At that time, Rakhal was staying with Sri Ramakrishna. After his mother's death, his father had married a second time. Now and then he came to Dakshineshwar because of Rakhal's being there. He did not raise much objection to his sons living with Sri Ramakrishna. Being a wealthy man of the world, he was always involved in litigations. There were lawyers and deputy magistrates among Sri Ramakrishna's visitors. Rakhal's father found it good to get acquainted with such people in the legal profession, since he expected to be benefited by their advices in worldly matters. Now and then Sri Ramakrishna cast a glance at Rakhal's father. It was Sri Ramakrishna's cherished desire that Rakhal should live with him permanently at Dakshineshwar. Sri Ramakrishna to Rakhal's father and the devotees. Ah, what a nice character Rakhal has developed. Look at his face, and every now and then you will notice his lips moving. Inwardly he repeats the name of God, and so his lips move. Youngsters like him belong to the class of the ever perfect. They are born with God consciousness. No sooner do they grow a little older than they realize the danger of coming in contact with the world. There is a parable of the Homa bird in the Vedas. The bird lives high up in the sky and never descends to earth. It lays its egg in the sky and the egg begins to fall, but the bird lives in such a high region that the egg hatches while falling. The fledgling comes out and continues to fall, but it is still so high that while falling it grows wings and its eyes open. Then the young bird perceives that it is dashing down towards the earth and will be instantly killed. The moment it sees the ground, it turns and shoots up towards its mother in the sky. Then its one goal is to reach its mother. Youngsters like Rakhal are like that bird. From their very childhood, they are afraid of the world, and their one thought is how to reach the mother, how to realize God. We read up to this on 20th on October, that was the last class. So I continue now. Two more paragraphs in the book. Sri Ramakrishna is telling, you may ask, how is it possible for these boys, born of worldly parents and living among the worldly minded, to develop such knowledge and devotion. Let me repeat this sentence. We'll be discussing these points later. Sri Ramakrishna is saying, you may ask, how is it possible for these boys, born of worldly parents and living among the worldly minded, to develop such knowledge and devotion? It can be explained. If a pea falls into a heap of animal dung, it germinates into a pea plant nonetheless. The peas that grow on that plant serve many useful purposes. Will it produce another kind of plant because it was sown in animal dung? Ah, what a sweet nature Rakhal has nowadays. And why shouldn't it be so? If the yam or tuber is a good one, its shoots also become good. All laugh, like father, like son. Here we get a glimpse of what happens in the worldly surroundings before a man or a woman turns towards the life of renunciation or monkhood. We also get a glimpse of why and how people choose to take up the life of a monk or a renunciate. It is similarly obvious that Sri Sri Thakur is speaking of the effect of these people's own karma or earlier samskaras or impressions. The impetus or inspiration to take up the life of a monk or a nun has very little to do with the experiences of our present life. It may be true that some good or bad events in this life trigger or activate the hidden force to quit the so-called regular way of life, that is married life. Hence, in some cases, it may be an accidental choice, but in majority of them it is an incidental choice. However, in all the cases, such candidates are born with earlier samskaras or impressions from their previous birth or births. Sri Sri Thakur used to tell a story. Once a man determined to do Tantra sadhana went into the forest. He wanted to practice Shava sadhana, a tantric ritualistic practice which can be done sitting on a human corpse. He procured one and made arrangements for the same and sat on the dead body to practice the tantric rituals. As he started with his meditation, a tiger came and carried him away. Now there was a young man who lost his way in the forest and at nightfall took shelter on the same tree at the foot of which this event took place. He saw what has happened. Now being curious, he came down and sat on the dead body and started meditating. No sooner had he began concentrating on the Divine Mother than she appeared before him. She asked, "My son, ask for a boon." Confused, the young man inquired, "O Mother, I am at a loss by the turn of events. I was wondering, how did such things come to pass? The man who worked hard to make all arrangements for his sadhana was killed by a tiger. On the other hand, here am I, who am not at all spiritual in any sense of the term. I got just amused and sat on the corpse, and you, mother, you appeared before me offering a boon. The Divine Mother smiled and said, "Don't worry about the event, my son. You have done enough in your previous births to deserve such an offer. A few things should happen together in the life of such candidates for the life of monks, so that the would-be monks are left with no other choice but becoming a renunciate. The bond of worldliness is so strong and has been made so strong over the years and over lives, and has been cultivated so long that a very big force is necessary to cut it and then make one available for the other way of life. It will of course consider the cases of, I am going to actually consider the cases of monks in general. Even though here Sri Sri Thakur is talking about Rakhal, who was a very special candidate and who later became Swami Brahmananda, the first president of the Ramakrishna order of monks. To be sure, there are some similarity between the general candidates and the special ones. That is in respect of the set of events that leads one to embracing the monastic life. Let us look at those conditions. Some are discussed in the passage that we read from the Gospel, and some have been derived from practical experiences and also the scriptures. Often I will be using a word practical, which will indicate that I am not a believer in extreme or aggressive ideas. The ideas which look extreme are not meant for the practitioners. They are reached at the end of our spiritual practices, not in the beginning. Please remember that Vedanta preaches very lofty ideals or goals, but at the same time, these ideas are intensely practical, as Swami Vivekananda has elaborately explained in his long lectures on practical Vedanta. These ideas, Vedantic ideas, are immensely practical because they have also prescribed, and very seriously so, a practical beginning at the level of a beginner. Suppose we raise the topic of such spiritual disciplines that a beginner has to undertake, and they are Nitya Vastu Viveka, etc. This Viveka is at once a practice and also a goal for the beginner. One has to put into regular practice the principle of discernment, Viveka, between what is permanent and what is impermanent. One has to start practicing it days in and days out together with one's daily duties as a man or woman who lives very much in the world. The practice will bring about a lifestyle change in the person, and the idea of Viveka will be more and more instilled in the mind. Finally, one day this will become like our habit of breathing, that we can do without paying attention to it. Then what will happen? Suppose you face a problematic situation. You not only analyze the problem from a worldly and also practical point of view, but also from the perspective of a discerned observer. You favor none of the parties involved in any incident or any problem, even if you are one of the parties. One of our Swamis withheld from other people some information about a controversial issue, that is for the sake of data protection. When he was pressed by one of the quarreling parties to release the information, he denied, saying, "I will not use them even for my own defense. In case it is needed by any court of law, I will happily turn them over to the court." The practice of discernment is one of the glorious acts that we can use, and use it repeatedly, to be established in the goal of Viveka. Similarly, we should apply in life the other recommended practice, Vairagya, dispassion. We have to remember that the guiding principle behind all our efforts to practice Viveka and Vairagya skillfully is the goal that we want our liberation, spiritual liberation, moksha. This principle is known as mumukshutva, longing for liberation. When these three, Viveka, Vairagya and mumukshutvam, work together through us, we experience that we are acquiring the 6 treasures that are products of our spiritual practices. The 6 treasures are Shama, that is control of the mind; Dhamma, control of the sense organs; Uparati, withdrawal; Titiksha, patience or endurance; Shraddha, faith in the existence of the conscious reality as Atman or Brahman or God; and finally Samadhanam, that is called Samadhi. Anyway, those conditions that lead a person to choose the life of renunciation are: number one, at first it has to be understood that such potential monks led their previous life or lives with strong inclination for renunciation, and they died with that resolve. These two are essential ingredients for choosing to lead a monastic life in this present birth. You know, most of the Upanishadic sages were householders in their life. Their realizations were based on practical worldly experiences of enough is enough. These are the experiences of Nasti akrita kritena, that is, there is no real meaning in our worldly life, which is nothing but a bundle of time pass. And that we cannot find the transcendental truth by means of practicing a purely materialistic way of living. This wisdom leads the monastic aspirant to a guru with the determination to undertake spiritual practices as prescribed by the scriptures. Then number 2, these candidates are born in a favorable environment, which can be good or bad or both, to propel them towards taking the decision in favor of renouncing worldliness. That is what Sri Sri Thakur is saying here. If the yam or tuber is a good one, its shoots also become good. like father, like son. Then number 3, as they grow up in this life, their own samskaras from the previous births start controlling their life in order to enable them to cut the bondage of the so-called normal way of life. Thereafter, they are emboldened by the same samskaras to force their way through the difficult life of a monk. Number 4, then the spiritual or material influence of their near and dear ones in this life really help in a positive or negative way to trigger or generate such a wish. The candidates for a monastic way of life may get support or may get resistance or even opposition from their near and dear ones, and most of the time that is the case. One cannot and really does not expect anything more. Number 5, then their own experience, whatever little they might have in this life, of detachment from the material life, and side by side their attraction to a spiritual goal of life, help them to justify their resolve. Enough is learned early. They are not antagonistic to this so-called normal way of life, but the truth is that they do not in any way fit into that normal way. And finally, and most importantly though, in most of the cases, they meet someone who is an example of practical inspiration. They feel that by the association of such inspiring people, their life is charged with practical spirituality and practical renunciation. This is the saga of the lives of the great ones like Vivekananda, like Buddha. They met great people in their life, and that changed the course of their life. And that gives meaning not only to their youth, but also to their old age. Not only to their enjoyments, but also to their suffering. Not only to their life, but to their death also. I would request you to remember that a candidate who chooses a monastic way of life actually do not frame the logic this concrete way, this intellectual way that I have outlined. But in retrospect, they would discover this process that silently worked behind the scene, as it were, and finally led them to that life. All these form the components of the force that leads one to choose the monastic life over a worldly life. Someone asked one of our Swamis, Swamiji, can you tell us why did you become a monk? The Swamiji answered, well, now I can explain to you why one should become a monk. But when I myself chose this path, I did not know why I was choosing it. There was an irrepressible urge in me. That force became more and more defined and demanding. And finally, I could deny it no more. It snatched me out of that life and placed me where I really belong to, where I am now. I found my home and found solution to my discontentment. And that was the answer. Well, now we move on to the next part of the Gospel. We read from the book M, that is Master Mahasaya, the chronicler of the writer of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, aside to Girindra. How well he has explained God with and without form, Do the Vaishnavas believe only in God with form? Girindra, perhaps so, because there was a discussion about God with form and without form. M. Did you understand what he meant by the eternal form of God, that clear crystal? I could not grasp it well. Sri Ramakrishna to M. Well, what are you talking about? M and Girindra smiled and remained silent. Later in the afternoon, the devotees were singing in the Panchavati, where Sri Ramakrishna joined them. Sri Ramakrishna, accompanied by M, was coming back to his room when he met Trailokya, a Brahmo devotee, on the way. Trailokya bowed before the master. Sri Ramakrishna, they are singing in the Panchavati, won't you go there? Trailokya, what shall I do there? Sri Ramakrishna, why? You will enjoy the music. Trailokya, I have been there already. Sri Ramakrishna, well, that's good. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting with the devotees on the southeast veranda of his room. Sri Ramakrishna, a holy man who has renounced the world will of course chant the name of God. That is only natural. He has no other duties to perform. If he meditates on God, it shouldn't surprise anybody. On the other hand, if he fails to think of God or chant his holy name, then people will think ill of him. But it is a great deal to his credit if a householder utters the name of God. Think of King Janaka. What courage he had! Indeed, he fenced with 2 swords, the one of knowledge and the other of work. He possessed the perfect knowledge of Brahman and also was devoted to the duties of the world. The constant company of holy men is necessary. The holy man introduces one to God. Kedar, yes sir, the great soul is born in the world for the redemption of humanity. He leads others to God, just as a locomotive engine takes along with it a long train of carriages. Or again, he, like a river or a lake, that quenches the thirst of many people. The devotees were ready to return home. One by one they saluted the master. At the sight of Bhavanath, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Don't go away today. The very sight of you inspires me." Bhavanath had not yet entered into worldly life. He shed tears of joy on hearing the name of God. Sri Ramakrishna looked on him as the embodiment of Narayana. Now we move on to read the events and conversations that happened on Thursday, March 29, 1883. Sri Ramakrishna had taken a little rest after his noon meal when a few devotees arrived from Calcutta, among them Amrita and the well-known singer of the Brahmo Samaj, Trailokya. Rakhal was not feeling well. The master was greatly worried about him and said to the devotees, "You see, Rakhal is not well. Will soda water help him? What am I to do now? Rakhal, please take the prasad from the Jagannath temple." Even as he spoke these words, Sri Ramakrishna underwent a strange transformation. He looked at Rakhal with the infinite tenderness of a mother and affectionately uttered the name of Govinda. Did he see in Rakhal the manifestation of God himself? The disciple was a young boy of pure heart who had renounced all attraction to lust and greed. And Sri Ramakrishna was intoxicated day and night with love of God. At the sight of Rakhal, his eyes expressed the tender feelings of a mother, a love like that which had filled the heart of Mother Yasoda at the sight of the baby Krishna. The devotees gazed at Sri Ramakrishna in wonder as he went into deep samadhi. As his soul soared into the realm of divine consciousness, his body became motionless. His eyes were fixed on the tip of his nose, and his breathing almost ceased. An unknown man, dressed in the ochre cloth of a monk, entered the room and sat on the floor. Sri Ramakrishna's mind was coming down to the ordinary plane of consciousness. Presently he began to talk, though the spell of samadhi still lingered. Sri Ramakrishna at the sight of the ochre cloth. Why this ochre robe? Should one put on such a thing for a mere fancy? A man once said, I have exchanged the Chandi, the holy book, for a drum. At first he used to sing the holy songs from the holy book. Now he beats the drum. All love. There are 3 or 4 varieties of renunciation. Afflicted with miseries at home, one may put on the ochre cloth of a monk, but that renunciation doesn't last long. Again, a man out of job puts on a ochre wearing cloth and goes off to Benares. After 3 months, he writes back home, I have a job here. I shall come home in a few days. Don't worry about me. Again, a man may have everything he wants. He lacks nothing, yet he does not enjoy his possessions. He weeps for God alone. That is real renunciation. No lie of any sort is good. A false robe, even though a holy one, is not good. If the outer garb does not correspond to the inner thought, it gradually brings ruin. Littering false words or doing false deeds, one gradually loses all fear. Far better is the white cloth of a householder. Attachment to worldliness, occasional lapses from the ideal, and an outer garb of ochre cloth. How dreadful! It is not proper for a righteous person to tell a lie or do something false, even in a dramatic performance. Once I went to Keshav's house to see the performance of a play called Navavrindavan. They brought something on the stage which they called the cross. Another actor sprinkled water which they said was the water of peace. I saw a third actor staggering and reeling in the role of a drunkard. A Brahmo devotee. It was K. Sri Ramakrishna. It is not good for a devotee to play such parts. It is bad for the mind to dwell on such subjects for a long while. The mind is like white linen fresh from the laundry. It takes the color in which you dip it. If it is associated with falsehood for a long time, it will be stained with falsehood. Okay, then I discontinue here. We have read a good deal already. There were some points, about 3 of them at least, that we need to understand properly. Sri Thakur says, but it is a great deal to his credit of a householder if he utters the name of God. The constant company of holy men is necessary. The holy man introduces one to God. For the householders, this clarification is of great consequence. In general, many householders are disappointed that they have lost the chance in this life. Yes, their dissatisfaction is true because they feel no satisfaction in the life that they have chosen or embraced. No more satisfaction. Or it may be true so far as their repentance is concerned. But Sri Thakur wants to encourage them out of this dilemma. As I discussed it last time, and as we regularly quote Sri Krishna, to say that rasa, the impression of worldly objects and the urge to enjoy them, are lodged very much inside our own minds. You see, desire or lust has a name in Sanskrit that is called kama. When this lust takes a physical form, he is called Kama Deva, or a male demigod. He has his wife whose name is Rati, passion or infatuation. Lust and passion are inseparable. The Hindu mythological story goes like this. Once Kamadeva wanted to entice the mind of Shiva. Shiva, as you know, is one of the 3 aspects of the Godhead or Ishvara. The 3 personified aspects are Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara or Shiva. These are there as faculties of the same Godhead or head God. In his ability to create, this Godhead is known by the name Brahma. In his ability to maintain the creation, the same Godhead is known as Vishnu. And in his role to resolve or withdraw the whole creation into himself, he is known as Maheshwara or Shiva. In the Gita, Sri Krishna showed that he is the one who is performing all the 3 acts in and through one person. The Vishwarupa Darshana Yoga, or the 11th chapter of the Gita, is an elaborate exposition of these 3 aspects of the same Godhead. Arjuna saw that the creation, maintenance, and withdrawal of the cosmos have been happening in the same God. Anyway, Shiva was known for his control over lust. On the other hand, the demigod Kamadeva wanted to test Shiva in this respect. He approached Shiva and tried to cast his spell or charm on his mind. Shiva was annoyed by his daring act of Kamadeva. He opened his third eye and the body of Kamadeva was destroyed. That is why Kamadeva is called by another name, Ananga, or the one without a physical body. Anga means physical body. Kamadeva's wife Rati was devastated, seeing her husband losing his physical body. She rushed to Shiva and prayed to him to show mercy on her husband. Shiva's another name is Ashutosha, one who is satisfied with very little of anything. A little prayer will satisfy him. So Shiva too felt bad about his own act of destroying the body of Kamadeva. He devised a plan and told Rati that it won't be possible to reconstruct the perished body of Kamadeva anymore. Hence, he gave a boon to Kamadeva that this Kamadeva, the lustful god, the lust personified, would from then onwards live in the minds of people, and Rati too will have a place therein. And according to the Vedic teaching, there are two ways to realize the same ultimate goal of life, or moksha, that is final liberation. One way is the way of a monk, which is characterized by two values of dharma and moksha, spiritual practices and liberation. And the second way is the way of the householders, which is characterized by dharma, artha or wealth, kama, lust or desire, and moksha. This path has included two of the most explosive values, lust and wealth. Both of these are explosive because if they are not harnessed properly, they can bring a person to his or her disaster or ruin. And both of these create rasa in a direct way in the mind of the householders. This rasa. Coming back to what I was examining, Sri Krishna mentions in the Gita that rasa, the impressions of worldly objects and the urge to enjoy them, reside in our mind. You don't need to have the physical objects to enjoy them. Only their memories will be enough to give you disappointment, curiosity, satisfaction or enjoyment. This memory of the objects is of two kinds. In the form of recollection of actual enjoyments in the past, and number two, in the form of an inquisitiveness or curiosity about how enjoyable the experience is. Like, for example, someone may remember his or her experience of drinking alcohol, and while another one who has never drunk alcohol in life would be suffering from the curiosity about how it feels like when I drink. Both, number one, the recollection of actual enjoyment of some things, and also number two, the curiosity about the enjoyment of the unexperienced things, are together called rasa by this one word by Sri Krishna. The word rasa also means the sap, the essence or the gist of anything. This can be there in the mind in the form of our thought and memory. We call the life as normal when we follow the trend set up by the majority of the population. The trend is that we are born in the world to enjoy life in the world. This life is the life of the rasa that Sri Krishna was talking about. Another type of rasa is that we want to enjoy this life in the next world too. Those of us who want to add more flavor to this tradition of enjoyment, unbroken enjoyments, they think of more enjoyments in the heaven. So you go with your own body there to have more and longer of the same earthly enjoyments. And see the fun. If you die as an old man, with all the sense organs already submitting their resignation from their job, you will be able to experience the enjoyment of a young man or woman in the heaven with your old dilapidated body. So illogical it is. These are called cock and bull stories. Be that as it may, let us not forget that we are studying the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and trying to understand the implication of Sri Sri Thakur's words. He said, "But it is a great deal to his credit if a householder utters the name of God." The constant company of holy men is necessary. The holy company he suggests as the antidote for that. As I have already said, for the householders, this clarification of Sri Sri Thakur is of great significance. The householders, at least many of them, are disappointed that they have lost the chance in this life. Yes, as I said, their dissatisfaction is true because these few feel no lasting satisfaction in the life that they have chosen and embraced. And it may be a really true experience so far as their repentance is concerned. But Sri Sri Thakur wants to encourage them and guide them out of this dilemma. We have to remember that Sri Sri Thakur is not saying some mere consoling words. What he is saying is just fact. Sri Sri Thakur prescribed the most effective means of keeping the mind of a householder in the thought of God, and that is satsang or holy company. Let me tell you that this is one of the guiding principles of my own experimentation with our mode of work in Germany. As monks who are strictly bound by our monastic vows, what we can do to help people of this part of this world was the theme of my experimentation. My trialing for the last more than 17 years produced a satisfactory result. I have discovered that we should provide as one of the items of our service opportunities for people to enjoy holy company, satsang, together with practical application of the principles of satsang. Together with practical application of the principles of satsang. Our retreats have been devised in such a manner that the participants have the opportunity to learn by hand the ways and means to be connected with the ultimate goal of life, even when they live in the worldly surroundings and among people of the same temperament. That is what Thakur was saying. And then we read that at the sight of Rakhal, Sri Ramakrishna's eyes expressed the tender feelings of a mother. So, the incarnations of God are God in human forms. Long before Darwin postulated the evolution theory, the Hindu mythology conceived of incarnations of God going through the evolutionary process. This is mentioned in the Padma Purana that the creator God Vishnu had appeared in different forms to help his creation in different times when there was a need. He took the forms of a Matsya, a giant fish, Kurma, a huge tortoise, Varaha, a powerful boar, Nrisimha, a form which had the upper part of the body as that of a lion and the lower part as that of a man, and Vamana, a short human being, Parashurama, a powerful human being, like that. See the way of evolution in the process of these incarnations of God. This narrative elaborates on the evolution of biological life forms reaching their peak in the human beings. Then we see that all the avatars and incarnations of God had forms as male ones. At least it appears to be so to a casual observer. But Sri Krishna says in the Gita that as the creator God, he is the Pita or father, Mata, the mother, Dhata, the controller, Pitamaha, the grandfather, and so on. Pitahamasya Jagatah Mata, Dhata, Pitama, etc. He is all in one, male, female, everything in one. On the other hand, there is a poem called the Devi Suktam, In the Rigveda, the oldest of spiritual literatures, there the woman saint Vak, the daughter of the sage Ambrin, is saying the same thing. She speaks about her realization in that holy poem in unmistakable terms. She says, I am all the male gods and female goddesses, and so on and so forth. There she does not make any difference between male or female principles. All are expressions of the same reality. There is an interesting account of one saint, Raya Ramananda, in the Vaishnava tradition. He was a governor of a province near the river Godavari in Andhra Pradesh in India. He met Sri Chaitanya Deva, who was an incarnation of God according to the Bhakti school of Bengal. Chaitanya Deva was an erudite scholar of the scriptures. So was Raya Ramananda. They had a discussion on scriptural matters. Sri Chaitanya was also known as Mahaprabhu, the great saint. So Chaitanya asked questions to Ramananda. The question and answer began with very simple matter, and they slowly turned into difficult, even cryptic answers. At one point, Raya Ramananda explained the Mahabhava, the highest form of bhakti, saying that in that state there remains no distinction between the sense of any gender, nasau, Ramana Naham Ramani Duhu Mano Mano Bhava Pesala Jani, like that Raya Ramananda said. That is, my ideal is no more a male principle and me a female. No, not like that. It is like two genderless minds being crushed into a crucible, a pot, and pasted into one. Pesala Jani. This idea would harm the duality of the path of bhakti. Hence Chaitanya Deva closed the mouth of the saint by his hand and did not allow him to speak further, because he was talking about non-dual Vedanta now. The mind of an incarnation of God is the same pasted mind which has both the mind of a man and that of a woman. Hence the devotees of Sri Ramakrishna worshipped him as Mother Kali at the Sampu Kurbati in Kolkata. That is why we have read in the life of Sri Ramakrishna how the lady devotees, when they would talk with Sri Thakur, would forget that they were in the presence of a man. They would think that he was one of them. In the passage that we have read from the Gospel, we see Sri Thakur pouring out his motherly love to the young boy Rakhal. Then it is worth reading again this other portion from the Gospel. Sri Thakur is saying, there are 3 or 4 varieties of renunciation. Afflicted with miseries at home, one may put on ochre cloth of a monk. But that renunciation does not last long. Again, a man out of job puts on an ochre wearing cloth and goes off to Banaras. After 3 months he writes back home saying, I have a job here. I shall come home in a few days. Don't worry about me. And then he says again, a man may have everything he wants. He lacks nothing. Yet he does not enjoy his possessions. He weeps for God alone. That is real renunciation. Then Thakur said, no lie of any sort is good. A false rope, even though a holy one, is not good. So, and he said that it is not good for a devotee to play such parts. When someone is playing the part of a monk or a drunkard, etc., just in a drama. So if someone does that continuously, that person will gain some habit and will grow that type of habit inside that person. There is a story of the 4 paintings told by one of our Swamis. I will keep his name to myself. It is a story that can be used to make fun about someone, but it holds a very high Vedantic truth. Once a group of visitors was in a museum. There was a man called, suppose, John in the group. The group is being led by a guide through a section of paintings of great artists. Our John was interested in a particular painting and got stuck with it. After a while, noticing that John lagged behind, the guide came forward and asked him to keep pace with the group. John asked him, "Sir, why did the painter paint a disfigured image of a man and the museum authorities displayed this here?" The guide smiled and led him by the hand without answering the question. Once again the same thing happened. John fell back and the guide came to fetch him again. John asked, "Why did the painter paint a hazy image of the same man here?" Once again the guide smiled and led him by the hand without answering the question. This was repeated again. John asked him again, "Why did the painter paint a distorted image of the same man?" Once again the guide smiled and led him by the hand without answering the question. At a 4th place, John saw another similar painting. Smiling from ear to ear, John called out the guide, saying, "Ah, look here, sir. I have found the man in his most handsome painting. Whose painting is this?" The guide smiled and said, "My dear, these are all mirrors. One is cracked, while the background reflective coating of 2 others has faded out, and this one in front of you now is a good mirror. And you, my dear, you are the most handsome man in all the 4 of the mirrors." It is almost an echo of the truth revealed by the Katha Upanishad. The Upanishadic mantra says, "Yada darsya tathatmani," etc. As one sees oneself in a dream, so one realizes the truth in Pitriloka, in the world of the manas, and so on and so forth. Today I will stop here because we have come to the end of our time. I will chant Om once. Om